The silk felt too tight, a suffocating embrace of borrowed luxury. It clung to my skin with an almost invasive intimacy, a stark contrast to the emotional distance that had been meticulously cultivated between Sarah and me. The faint scent of lilies, cloying and overly sweet, did little to disguise the bitter, metallic taste that had settled on my tongue, a physical manifestation of the sourness that had permeated our relationship for so long. They had described it as a small wedding, intimate, just close family and a few select friends. Yet, my invitation, the physical embodiment of an acknowledged place, had never arrived. It was a subtle omission, a deliberate void that spoke volumes in its silence. It had been a slow burn, this estrangement. A glacial creep of disconnect rather than a sudden rupture. Years of subtle digs, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, had chipped away at my resolve. I had been the convenient scapegoat, the ready-made target for every family drama, the easy recipient of blame when things went awry. I had been deemed too much, too loud when I dared to voice an opinion, too emotional when I felt a pang of hurt, too this or too that by her, Sarah. For most of my life, she had been my sister, a word that once conjured images of shared secrets and unwavering loyalty. But somewhere along the winding path of our shared history, the sisterhood had fractured, eroded by her insatiable need for control and my quiet refusal to bend to her will. I had tried, I truly had. I'd offered support, sat through endless pronouncements about her perfect life, her perfect fiancé, their meticulously crafted perfect future. I'd swallowed the condescension, the thinly veiled criticisms that, like persistent raindrops, chipped away at my self-worth, leaving it fragile and exposed. Then came the wedding. The elaborate save-the-dates, embossed with an elegance that belied the underlying exclusion, had flooded social media feeds. The meticulously crafted guest list, a document of Sarah's carefully curated social circle, somehow, inexplicably, omitted my name. I saw the photos, of course. They filtered through the digital ether, a constant, unavoidable reminder. The delicate lace of her gown, the nervous smiles of the bridal party, the beaming groom standing beside her, his arm possessively around her waist. My place at the ceremony, I imagined, was conspicuously empty, a blank space in the otherwise crowded tableau. I didn't confront her. What was the point? Her mind was made up, her narrative already written, etched in stone. I was the inconvenient character, the one who didn't fit the pristine picture she was so desperately painting for the world, and perhaps, for herself. So I stayed away, a phantom guest, a silent observer from the periphery. I let the silence speak, a language I had become fluent in, letting her believe my absence was a passive acceptance, a quiet defeat. It was, in its own way, a strategic retreat. The weeks that followed were a strange sort of limbo. A suspension of reality, where the world continued to spin, oblivious to the quiet implosion that had occurred in my own orbit. I heard snippets, of course, like fragments of overheard conversations. Her friends gushing about the perfect day, the fairy tale ending. I'd nod, offer a polite smile, a carefully constructed mask of indifference, and change the subject. Inside, however, a cold resolve had begun to form, not of anger, a volatile emotion I'd long since learned to manage, but of a quiet, unsettling clarity. I was done being the silent recipient of her dismissals, the perpetual punching bag for her insecurities. The exhaustion of always being the one to absorb the fallout had finally outweighed the lingering hope for reconciliation. Then, the whispers started. Faint at first, like static on a radio, barely perceptible, then growing louder, more insistent, carrying on the currents of gossip and rumor. They spoke of a different kind of fairy tale, one with a jarring, unexpected plot twist. The story that trickled back to me, through the labyrinthine channels of mutual acquaintances, one in particular who couldn't quite suppress a telltale twitch of amusement, was both horrifying and, I admit, strangely, deeply satisfying. On the day of the wedding, standing at the altar, bathed in the ethereal glow of cathedral light, with all her carefully curated guests watching, he had simply walked away. Not a dramatic scene, not a shouted argument that would have provided fodder for future family gatherings. Just a quiet turn, a decisive movement, a briefcase clutched in his hand, and a steady stride towards the exit, leaving Sarah standing there, a beautiful, bewildered statue, her meticulously constructed dream shattering around her into a million invisible shards. The silence, I was told, was deafening, a vacuum that sucked the air out of the grand space. The mortification, palpable, spreading through the assembled goo. It's like a contagion. I didn't call. I didn't send a card, a token of sympathy or concern. I didn't offer a single word of comfort or condolence. Instead, I focused on my own life, on the myriad of things that had been pushed aside, neglected, during her all-consuming wedding planning frenzy. I reconnected with old friends, those who had endured my own quiet struggles with understanding and empathy. I pursued a neglected hobby, losing myself in the creative process, finding solace in its tangible results. I simply lived, breathing in the freedom that came with shedding the weight of her drama. The real unfolding of consequences wasn't immediate. It was a slow, dawning realization for everyone else, a gradual piecing together of disparate clues. When the wedding photos, the ones Sarah had so carefully curated and painstakingly edited, began to circulate more widely, the absence of my name, and more importantly, my presence, became a quiet talking point. People started to connect the dots, to ask questions, their curiosity piqued by the conspicuous void. Why wasn't her sister there? Had there been a falling out? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, swirling like dust motes in a sunbeam, each one a subtle jab at Sarah's carefully constructed narrative. Then, Sarah started to resurface. Tentatively at first, like a hesitant wave lapping at the shore. Her social media, which had been meticulously updated with every detail of her pre-wedding bliss, went quiet for a while, a period of enforced reflection. Then, it returned, not with the same effusive joy, but with carefully staged photos of her looking contemplative, a hint of hardship in her posture, without revealing the brutal, unvarnished truth of her public humiliation. But people are observant, especially when it comes to the intricate social dynamics of a close-knit family. They saw the forced smiles, the slightly hollow look in her eyes that no amount of digital retouching could entirely erase. They noticed the conspicuous absence of any mention of her fiancé, the man who had, of course, vanished from her online life as quickly and as mysteriously as he had appeared. The real shift, the undeniable turning point, came at a family gathering a few months later. It was the first time I'd seen Sarah since before the wedding, and the air in the room was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable discomfort that clung to the floral wallpaper and the polished mahogany. She looked thinner, her usual vibrant energy muted, as if some essential spark had been extinguished. She tried to engage me, her voice a little too bright, a little too eager, an almost desperate attempt to project an image of normalcy. "So good to see you," she'd said, her eyes darting around the room, as if seeking approval from unseen arbiters, a silent jury of her peers. I simply smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that held no trace of triumph, only a quiet acceptance. "It's good to see you too, Sarah." The words were simple, devoid of any underlying accusation. The conversation that followed was, as expected, stilted. She spoke vaguely of difficult times and unexpected challenges, her words carefully chosen to convey a sense of hardship without revealing the specifics of her devastating experience. And then, the moment arrived, orchestrated by the relentless curiosity of Aunt Carol, a woman who prided herself on her uncanny ability to extract information, no matter how buried. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice laced with a carefully constructed faux concern, a practiced blend of sympathy and prying. "We were all so worried when things didn't quite work out with the wedding. Such a shock. Especially since your sister wasn't there. We all wondered what happened." The question hung in the air, a delicate probe aimed directly at Sarah's most vulnerable point. Sarah's face paled, the color draining from her cheeks as if in a silent confession. She stammered, trying to conjure a plausible excuse, something about needing space, about keeping things private, about the complexities of modern relationships. But the damage was done. The carefully constructed facade, the elaborate edifice of denial she had built, was crumbling under the weight of simple, undeniable truth. The silence that followed her fragmented explanation was more damning than any accusation, a collective understanding that settled over the room. It was a shared realization of her calculated cruelty and the universe's ironic, quiet response. No one looked at me with pity, no one saw me as the victim in this unfolding drama. Instead, they looked at Sarah with a newfound skepticism, their earlier admiration replaced by a subtle distrust. They saw the exclusion, my absence from her wedding, not as a choice made in anger, but as a harbinger of her own impending misfortune, a self-fulfilling prophecy of isolation. My quiet absence, their unspoken question, had inadvertently illuminated the true character of T. Day, revealing the rot beneath the polished surface. I didn't need to say a word. I simply met her gaze, a calm, steady look that conveyed nothing but acceptance of what was, a quiet acknowledgement of the unalterable truth. Her empire of perceived superiority, built on the shaky foundations of carefully managed appearances and the marginalization of those she deemed beneath her, had been quietly, irrevocably, dismantled. The wedding was a disaster, yes, a public spectacle of failure. But the true consequence, the enduring legacy, was the slow, public unraveling of Sarah's carefully curated image and the quiet, unassailable dignity that came with my own disengagement from her toxic narrative. The silence, once a sign of my exclusion, had become the loudest, most irrefutable testament to her downfall.